What if you meet a man who looks at you straight in the eye and says, "I am lying"? Now stop and think. If he's telling the truth, then he must be lying. But if he's lying, then he's actually telling the truth. This is the liar paradox, one of most simple yet mind-bending statement that breaks logic itself. It's simple yet impossible to resolve. Let's put it another way. Suppose a sign says, "This statement is false." If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. It loops endlessly, with no way to determine a definite answer. Now, why does this matter? Well, paradoxes like this expose the limits of language and logic. In real life, we assume that every statement is either true or false. There's no in-between. But the liar paradox shows that certain statements don't fit into this neat system. It challenges the very foundation of how we understand truth. Philosophers and mathematicians have wrestled with this paradox for centuries. Some suggest new ways of thinking about truth, while others argue that self-referential statements like this simply shouldn't exist. But here's the real question. If a simple sentence can break logic so easily, what else might be uncertain in the world we take for granted? Paradox of the crocodile. A crocodile snatches a child from the riverbank. The desperate parent begs for the child's return. The crocodile, being unusually logical, offers a deal. If you correctly guess whether I will return your child, I will give them back. If you guess wrong, I will keep them. The parent thinks carefully and says, "You will not return my child." Now, the crocodile is stuck. If the statement is true and the crocodile wasn't going to return the child, then by the deal's logic, it must return the child. But if the crocodile does return the child, then the parent's guess was actually wrong, meaning the crocodile should have kept them. A contradiction. This is a classic paradox of self-reference, much like the liar paradox. The crocodile's logic ties itself into a knot, where any action contradicts the original condition. The situation exposes a flaw in rigid logical systems. What happens when rules contradict themselves? Beyond its logical twist, this paradox reflects real-world dilemmas, like unreliable contracts or misleading promises. If someone sets up a system where any outcome contradicts itself, can trust or fairness truly exist? The crocodile's predicament is more than just a brain teaser. It challenges how we think about reasoning, truth, and deception. And in the end, whether the child is returned or not, one thing is clear. The crocodile's deal was never meant to be fair. Ship of Theseus. Picture this. You own a classic car, passed down through generations. Over the years, parts wear out. First the tires, then the engine, then the seats. Bit by bit, you replace every single part. One day, nothing from the original car remains. Here's the question. Is it still the same car? Now, let's take it a step further. Suppose someone collects all the old parts you replaced and reassembles them into a working vehicle. That looks like your original car too. So, which one is the real one? The fully restored version, or the one that gradually evolved? This is the dilemma at the heart of an ancient thought experiment. A legendary ship, used by the hero Theseus, is preserved in a museum. As the years go by, its wooden planks decay and are replaced. Eventually, every plank has been swapped out. Is it still the same ship? And if the discarded planks were reassembled into a second ship, which one holds the true identity of Theseus's vessel? At its core, this paradox challenges our understanding of identity. Are things defined by their material parts or by continuity over time? The same question applies to people. If every cell in your body is replaced over the years, are you still the same person? The answer isn't simple, and that's what makes this paradox fascinating. Whether it's a ship, a car, or even you, the question remains, what really makes something itself? Sorites paradox. Imagine you're holding a single grain of sand. Clearly, that's not a heap. Now add another grain, still not a heap. Keep adding one by one. At what point does it actually become a heap? Now let's reverse it. Suppose you start with a massive pile of sand. Remove one grain, still a heap. Remove another, and another. Eventually, you're left with just one grain. But when exactly did it stop being a heap? This raises an interesting problem. How do we define vague concepts like heap, bald, or tall. If one hair doesn't make a person bald, and removing just one hair never seems to cause baldness, then how do people go bald at all? The issue is that vague terms don't have clear-cut boundaries. Words like rich, fast, or old work in everyday language, but fall apart under precise scrutiny. If $1 doesn't make you rich, then adding one at a time should never make a difference. But clearly, at some point, it does. So where do we draw the line? Some argue that language is simply imprecise, while others suggest we should rethink how we categorize things. This paradox reminds us that many of the labels we use every day are more fluid than they seem. It's not just about heaps of sand, it's about how we define reality itself. Unexpected hanging paradox. A judge sentences a prisoner, telling him, "You will be hanged at noon on a weekday next week, but the execution will be a surprise. You won't see it coming." The prisoner thinks hard. If he's still alive by Thursday night, the hanging must be on Friday. But if he knows that, then Friday isn't a surprise. So Friday is impossible. Now, if he's alive by Wednesday night, the only options left are Thursday or Friday. But Friday is already ruled out, meaning Thursday must be the day. But again, if he knows that, it's no longer a surprise. By this logic, he eliminates every day of the week, concluding the hanging can't happen at all. Feeling confident, he relaxes in his cell until the guards drag him out on Wednesday at noon. He is completely shocked. The execution was indeed a surprise, despite his airtight reasoning that it was impossible. This paradox messes with logic in a fascinating way. The prisoner's argument seems sound, but it leads to a false conclusion. He assumes that if he can predict the hanging, it can't happen, but that assumption collapses the moment he's actually surprised. It highlights the strange tension between reasoning about future knowledge and the reality of an unpredictable event. Just because we can logically eliminate possibilities doesn't mean reality follows our logic. Sometimes the unexpected happens exactly as planned. Grandfather paradox. You build a time machine, step inside, and travel back to the past. But instead of sightseeing, you have one shocking mission: to prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. Now, if you succeed, your parents would never be born. And if they were never born, you would never exist. But if you never existed, how did you go back in time in the first place? This is the grandfather paradox, one of the biggest headaches in time travel theory. It's a contradiction that throws the very concept of cause and effect into chaos. The moment you interfere with the past in a way that prevents your own existence, you create an impossible loop, one where you both exist and don't exist at the same time. Scientists and philosophers have debated this paradox for decades. Some suggest that time travel is simply impossible because of contradictions like this. Others propose the many worlds theory, where any change in the past creates a new, alternate timeline. So even if you erase yourself in one reality, another version of you still exists somewhere else. So, if time travel ever becomes real, how would the universe stop such paradoxes from happening? Would reality itself break? Or is there some hidden rule of the universe that prevents us from changing the past? Maybe one day we'll find out, if time travelers from the future don't stop us first. Bootstrap paradox. You're cleaning out your attic when you stumble upon an old, dusty book. The author's name is faded, but the content is fascinating. Inspired, you decide to copy it word for word and publish it as your own. The book becomes famous, and centuries later, someone finds a copy, travels back in time, and hands it to your younger self. You copy it again, and history repeats. But wait, who actually wrote the book? It was never created, just passed through time in an endless loop. It's not just books. Imagine if a scientist from the future traveled back and gave Shakespeare his own plays. Shakespeare copies them down, and history credits him as a genius. But if the plays were never originally written, where did they come from? This messes with our idea of cause and effect. Normally things have an origin. Books are written, ideas are invented. But in this strange scenario, they seem to appear out of thin air, with no real beginning. Does this mean time loops can create something from nothing? Or does it expose a flaw in how we understand time itself? It leaves us with a strange and unsettling question. If an object has no origin, does it even exist in the first place? Raven paradox. Suppose a scientist wants to test the statement, all ravens are black. The obvious way is to observe ravens. Each time she finds a black one, it seems to confirm the rule. But here's the strange part. Logically, anything that isn't a raven and isn't black should also confirm the statement. That means spotting a red apple, a blue car, or a yellow banana technically provides evidence that all ravens are black. Sounds absurd, right? How can looking at apples tell us anything about ravens? This strange logic is at the heart of the paradox. In formal reasoning, a statement like, all ravens are black, is the same as saying, everything that is not black is not a raven. So by that logic, every non-black, non-raven we see, like a green leaf or a white shoe, should count as evidence. But intuitively, that feels wrong. Seeing a million non-black objects doesn't tell us anything useful about ravens. It seems like only direct observations of ravens should matter. So, is logic fooling us? Or is our intuition missing something? Philosophers have debated this for years, and there's no clear answer. Some argue that while the reasoning is correct in theory, it's just not practical. Others say it exposes a deeper flaw in how we think about evidence. Either way, it's a paradox that challenges how we define proof itself. Ross paradox. A teacher tells a student, hand in your homework. That's a simple, clear instruction. But what if the teacher had instead said, hand in your homework or set the school on fire? The second statement still logically includes handing in homework, but suddenly it sounds much more extreme. This is the strange logic behind the paradox. In formal reasoning, a statement like do X is considered logically equivalent to do X or do something impossible, absurd, or disastrous. That's because if the first option is true, the whole statement must be true, regardless of how ridiculous the second option is. This leads to an unsettling result. A simple command can be rewritten in a way that makes it seem like it includes something completely unrelated. If someone tells you, mail the letter, that logically implies, mail the letter or destroy the world. The destruction part is irrelevant, yet it feels like the meaning of the statement has changed. The paradox exposes a strange gap between logic and common sense. While the rule works mathematically, it doesn't reflect how humans actually interpret language. We don't assume extreme alternatives unless they're explicitly stated. So, while logic says both versions of the command mean the same thing, intuition tells us otherwise. The question is, should we trust the rules of formal logic or the way we naturally understand meaning? Temperature paradox. You're in a cozy cabin, staring at a sleek digital thermometer on the wall. It's supposed to tell you the exact temperature. Simple, right? But here's where things get weird. Let's say the room is sitting at exactly 20 degrees Celsius. The thermometer lights up, proudly displaying 20 degrees Celsius. But that tiny glowing display gives off heat. A small, almost unnoticeable amount, but enough to nudge the room's temperature up to 20.1 degrees Celsius. Now, the thermometer is wrong. It catches on, updates to 20.1 degrees Celsius, but that very update adds more heat, pushing the room to 20.2 degrees Celsius. And on it goes, an endless loop where the thermometer keeps adjusting, but can never land on the actual temperature. It's like a dog chasing its tail. Frustrating, never-ending, and impossible to win. This temperature paradox isn't just a quirky thought experiment, it's a glimpse into a much bigger truth. Measuring something can change the very thing you're trying to measure. This happens in quantum physics, where just looking at a particle can change its behavior, or in psychology, where observing people can alter how they act. So, next time you glance at your thermostat, give it some credit. It's trying its best, but in this paradox, it's forever stuck in a game it can't win. Barbershop paradox. A small town has a rule. The barber shaves everyone who does not shave themselves, and only those people. Seems simple, right? But now ask yourself, who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, he's breaking the rule, because he only shaves those who don't shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then according to the rule, the barber must shave him. It's a logical trap where no answer works. This is a version of a paradox created by Bertrand Russell, which highlights contradictions in self-referential logic. At first glance, the rule seems reasonable, but when applied to the barber himself, it collapses. It's not just a quirky puzzle, It exposes deeper problems in logic and set theory. Russell actually used a similar paradox to challenge the foundations of mathematics. Imagine a list that contains all lists that don't list themselves. Should this list include itself? If it does, it shouldn't. If it doesn't, it should. Just like the barber's dilemma, the logic breaks down. The takeaway? Sometimes, a simple-sounding rule creates an impossible situation. The paradox shows how tricky self-reference can be and why logical systems need careful design to avoid contradictions. Catch-22. A soldier in a war zone wants to be discharged for being mentally unfit. The rule. Any soldier who requests discharge on the grounds of insanity is proving they are sane, because only a rational person would try to avoid danger. This is a catch-22, a situation where the only way out is blocked by the very rule that creates the problem. No matter what the soldier does, he's trapped. The term comes from Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22, where military bureaucracy ties people in impossible loops. But this paradox isn't just about war. It shows up everywhere. Imagine applying for a job that requires work experience, but the only way to get experience is by having a job. Or needing a loan to start a business, but being denied because you don't already have money. These are real-life catch-22s, situations where the solution is impossible because of the problem itself. What makes this paradox so frustrating is that the rule seems logical on the surface, but in practice, it shuts down all options. There's no way to win. That's why catch-22 has become shorthand for any no-win situation. It's a reminder that sometimes the rules that are meant to provide order can end up making things impossible instead. Paradox of free choice. A waiter hands you a menu and says, "You can order anything you want." Sounds like true freedom, right? But what if your choice was never really free? This paradox suggests that the very act of choosing may not be as free as it seems. If every choice is influenced by personal preferences, past experiences, or even external pressures, then is it really a choice at all? Think about it. You might pick pasta over pizza because you love Italian food. But why do you love it? Maybe because you grew up eating it, or a friend once recommended it. If your decision is shaped by factors beyond your control, then was it ever truly free? This paradox challenges the idea of free will versus determinism. If every decision is based on something before it, are we just following a predetermined path, even when we think we're making independent choices? Some argue that true freedom means having no outside influence at all, but that seems impossible. Others say freedom isn't about being uninfluenced, but about acting on what we want, even if those wants are shaped by the world around us. So, when you make a choice, are you exercising free will or just following the script of your experiences? Drinker paradox. Picture a crowded bar. Somewhere in the room, at least one person is holding a drink. Now here's the surprising claim. If anyone in the bar is drinking, then everyone in the bar is drinking. Sounds ridiculous, right? But logically, it's true. Here's how it works. Suppose there's at least one drinker in the bar. Now, pick any person. Let's say they aren't drinking. The statement doesn't say who the drinker is, just that if one person is drinking, then everyone is. Since this non-drinker exists, the statement doesn't have to be tested. But if you picked the actual drinker, then the logic still holds. Either way, the statement can't be false. This paradox, from mathematical logic, plays with the way implication statements work. In everyday language, saying, if A, then B, suggests a connection. But in formal logic, such a statement is always true unless A is false, even if there's no meaningful link between A and B. It's a reminder that logic doesn't always match intuition. In real life, saying, if one person drinks, everyone does, seems absurd. But mathematically, the statement is structured in a way that makes it technically valid, even if it feels completely wrong. What the tortoise said to Achilles. Achilles, the mighty Greek warrior, is having a debate with a clever tortoise. The tortoise asks, if A and B are true, then C must also be true. Do you agree? Achilles nods. That's just basic logic. If the first two statements are correct, the conclusion must follow. But the tortoise isn't done. Now, agree to one more thing. If A and B are true, and if A and B, then C is also true, then C must follow. Achilles agrees again. Then the tortoise grins. Great! But now agree that if all that is true, then C still follows. Achilles is stuck. No matter how many times he agrees, the tortoise can always demand one more step before reaching the conclusion. The chain never actually ends. This paradox, created by Lewis Carroll, reveals a strange problem in logic. Achilles assumes that if something is logically true, we must accept it. But the tortoise shows that, in theory, someone can always refuse to take the final step, keeping the process going forever. It's a tricky idea. Even simple reasoning isn't just about logic. At some point, we have to stop questioning and just accept that rules work. Paradox of entailment. Your friend claims, if the moon is made of cheese, then I am the king of the world. Sounds ridiculous, right? But in formal logic, this statement is actually considered true, even though the moon is obviously not made of cheese. Here's why. In classical logic, if a statement is false, then any conclusion drawn from it is automatically valid. Suppose we start with 2 plus 2 equals 5. Since this is false, we could say, if 2 plus 2 equals 5, then cats can fly. And surprisingly, logic would still consider this a sound argument. The problem arises because traditional logic only cares whether conclusions follow from premises, not whether the premises themselves make sense. If the starting point is false, the system allows anything to follow. That's why an absurd claim can logically lead to another, no matter how unrelated they seem. Of course, this isn't how reasoning works in real life. No one would accept nonsense leading to meaningful conclusions. To fix this, some logicians propose relevance logic, which requires that conclusions must be directly related to their premises. Still, this strange loophole highlights a weird flaw in strict reasoning. If pigs could fly, then, well, literally anything could be true. Lottery paradox. A lottery ticket sits in your hand. You know the odds, millions to 1 against winning. Given that, it seems perfectly reasonable to believe your ticket won't win. But here's the catch. The same logic applies to every single ticket. If each individual ticket is almost certainly a loser, then shouldn't we conclude that no ticket will win? That, of course, is wrong, because we know that one ticket must win. This is the contradiction at the heart of the paradox. It feels rational to believe each ticket will lose, but it's impossible for all of them to be losers. The problem arises from how we treat probabilities in belief. Individually, it makes sense to say each ticket probably won't win. But if we apply that reasoning across the entire lottery, we end up with a conclusion that contradicts reality. It exposes a flaw in how we handle rational beliefs. Just because something is extremely unlikely doesn't mean we can treat it as impossible. Some philosophers argue this shows a problem with the way we justify beliefs. Others suggest it highlights a gap between individual probabilities and collective certainty. Either way, it leaves us with a strange realization. You can be completely reasonable in believing something, yet still be wrong. Munchausen trilemma. You're asked to prove something, anything. But here's the problem. How do you justify your reasoning without running into an infinite loop? Every belief, fact, or argument needs a foundation. But when you try to justify that foundation, you run into 3 bad options. First, you could keep giving reasons forever, but that leads to an endless chain with no real starting point. Second, you could circle back to your original point, which just assumes what you're trying to prove. Or third, you could accept some statements without proof, but then you're relying on blind assumptions. No matter what, you're stuck. Every argument must rest on something, but any attempt to justify that foundation leads to infinite regress, circular reasoning, or unproven assumptions. This dilemma is named after Baron Munchausen, a fictional character who supposedly pulled himself out of a swamp by his own bootstraps. It's an impossible task, just like proving any belief with complete certainty. It reveals a deep problem in logic and philosophy. Every belief needs justification, but justification itself is never absolute. We rely on reasoning, but at some point, we have to stop asking why, even if we don't have a perfect answer. Hilbert's hotel paradox. A hotel with infinite rooms sounds like a place where you'd never have to worry about reservations. But what if every single room is already occupied? Yet somehow, the hotel can still accommodate new guests. This is the strange world of Hilbert's hotel. Suppose a new guest arrives at this completely full hotel. Instead of turning them away, the manager shifts every current guest one room up. So the person in room 1 moves to room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. This opens up room 1 for the new guest. Even though the hotel was full, it magically made space. Now what if an infinite number of new guests show up? No problem. The manager just tells everyone to move to the room that's double their current number. Room 1 goes to 2, room 2 to 4, 3 to 6, and so on. This clears out all the odd-numbered rooms, which are also infinite, leaving space for an endless number of new visitors. This paradox shows how infinity defies intuition. A hotel that's full can still fit more people, and removing guests doesn't necessarily make it less full. It challenges our basic understanding of size, numbers, and limits, because in the world of infinity, the rules are anything but normal. Paradox of the court. A clever law student strikes a deal with his teacher. He'll only pay for his lessons if he wins his first court case. It seems fair. If he loses, he won't have any winnings to pay with. But things take a turn when the student finishes his training and never takes a case. The teacher, frustrated, sues the student for payment. Now comes the paradox. If the teacher wins the case, the court orders the student to pay. But according to their deal, the student only has to pay if he wins his first case. Since losing means he doesn't have to pay, this contradicts the ruling. But if the student wins the case, the court rules he doesn't owe anything. Yet this would be his first legal victory, meaning, by their original deal, he now does have to pay. No matter what, the outcome contradicts itself. The case becomes an impossible loop. Winning means he must pay, but paying means he lost. Losing means he doesn't pay, but not paying means he won. This paradox challenges the logic of contracts and legal reasoning. If rules create contradictions, how can they ever be applied fairly? Even in a court of law, it seems some arguments are simply unwinnable. Ellsberg paradox. You're in a game where you have to pick a ball from one of 2 urns to win a prize. The first urn has exactly 50 red balls and 50 black balls. The second urn also contains red and black balls, but you don't know in what proportion. Now, you have to bet on drawing a red ball. Which urn do you choose? Most people pick the first urn, the one with the known 50-50 chance. But what if you had to bet on drawing a black ball? Strangely enough, most people still prefer the first urn. That's the Ellsberg paradox. When faced with uncertainty, people avoid it, even when logic says both options should be equally risky. At its core, this paradox reveals something odd about human decision-making. In both cases, the second urn has an unknown split between red and black, meaning it could even have a better chance of winning than the first urn. But our natural instinct is to avoid uncertainty, something economists call ambiguity aversion. This paradox challenges traditional economic theories that assume people make decisions based purely on probabilities. Instead, real-life choices often hinge on how much we dislike the unknown. From investing money to making life decisions, the Ellsberg paradox explains why people tend to favor what feels predictable, even if the unpredictable could be just as good, or even better. So next time you hesitate, because something seems uncertain, ask yourself, are you making a smart choice, or just avoiding the unknown? Paradox of the preface. An author writes a book filled with carefully researched facts. In the preface, they thank their editors and admit, despite my best efforts, there may be some errors. Seems reasonable, right? But here's the problem. This creates a contradiction. The author believes every statement in the book is true. Otherwise, they wouldn't have written them. But at the same time, they also believe that at least one statement is probably wrong. So, do they actually believe their own book or not? This is the paradox of the preface. It highlights a conflict in how we handle belief and certainty. On one hand, it's rational to trust each statement based on evidence. On the other hand, it's also rational to accept that humans make mistakes. But these two reasonable beliefs seem to contradict each other. The paradox raises an interesting question. Can we ever be fully certain of anything? If even the most careful authors acknowledge possible errors, then isn't every set of beliefs, even our own, potentially flawed? It's not just about books. This applies to everyday reasoning. We trust facts and logic, yet we also accept that we could be wrong. This paradox shows that even the most rational way of thinking can lead to an unsettling conclusion. Certainty and doubt can exist at the same time. Two-envelope paradox. You're given two sealed envelopes. One contains twice as much money as the other, but you don't know which is which. You open one and find, say, $100 inside. Now comes the dilemma. Should you switch? At first, it seems like it doesn't matter. But then, a strange reasoning takes over. The other envelope either has $50 or $200, both equally likely. If it has $200, switching gains you $100. If it has $50, switching loses you $50. Since the potential gain is bigger than the potential loss, switching seems like the better choice. But hold on, this logic would apply no matter what amount you see. Even if the first envelope had $1,000, you'd still be tempted to switch. That means you'd never stop switching. But if switching is always the right move, doesn't that mean it was also wrong to switch in the first place? The paradox reveals a flaw in how we calculate expected value. The reasoning assumes both outcomes are equally likely, but in reality, the probabilities depend on which envelope you started with. The math tricks us into thinking switching is always better, even though both envelopes were identical before opening the first one. So, should you switch? Well, if the logic says to always switch, then logically, you should have never picked the first envelope at all. Simpson's paradox. Two doctors work at a hospital. One has a higher overall success rate than the other. Seems like the better choice is obvious, right? But then, when you break it down by type of patient, mild cases and severe cases, the other doctor has a higher success rate in both categories. How is that possible? This happens when overall statistics tell a completely different story than individual groups. The trick: hidden variables. In this case, the doctor with the lower overall success rate might handle mostly severe cases, where success is harder. Meanwhile, the other doctor deals with mostly mild cases, where success is easier. Since severe cases lower overall success rates, the numbers look misleading, even though the first doctor performs better in every situation. This strange effect appears in real-world data all the time. A new drug might seem ineffective overall, but actually works better for every age group separately. A baseball player might have a lower overall batting average, but a higher one in every season played. To conclude, numbers don't always tell the full story. Without understanding how data is grouped, we can be tricked into drawing the wrong conclusions, even when the math looks convincing. Friendship paradox. Ever feel like your friends have more friends than you? Turns out you're probably right. And not because you're unpopular. It's a strange mathematical illusion that affects almost everyone. Think about it this way. People with lots of friends are more likely to be your friends than people with fewer friends. That means when you look at your social circle, it's naturally filled with people who have above average connections. This makes it seem like everyone is more popular than you, even if that's not actually true. It's not just a trick of perception. It's built into the math of social networks. Imagine a small group where most people have 3 or 4 friends, but a few social butterflies have dozens. Those outgoing people skew the average, so when you compare yourself to your friends, their numbers will often be higher than yours. This odd effect shows up everywhere. On social media, most people follow influencers with massive followings, making their own follower count seem small. In school, students feel like their classmates are invited to more parties than they are. Even in workplaces, employees might think their colleagues are busier or more well-connected. It's a reminder that comparisons can be misleading. Your experience is shaped by who you're looking at, not by the actual average. Inspection paradox. Why does the bus always seem to take longer when you're waiting compared to when you're on it? It's not just bad luck, it's a statistical illusion at play. The reason is simple. Longer gaps between buses are more likely to be the ones you experience. Imagine a schedule where buses arrive at random intervals, some close together, some far apart. If you show up at a random time, you're far more likely to land in one of the long gaps. Short gaps are rare, so you're less likely to arrive during them. As a result, the average wait time feels much longer than expected. This effect isn't just about buses. In college classes, students might feel like their lecture halls are always crowded. That's because popular courses have more students, so the average student experiences bigger class sizes, even if the school's overall average is lower. It even applies to social life. Most people feel like their friends go to more parties than they do. But a packed party means more people experience it, making it seem like parties are more common than they actually are. The strange part? Nothing about the system is actually broken. The gaps and averages don't change, but the way we experience them does. Lindley's paradox. A scientist runs a study and finds a tiny difference between two groups. The result is statistically significant, meaning it's unlikely to be due to chance. But wait, does that really mean the effect is real? Here's where things get weird. If the sample size is huge, even the smallest difference can reach statistical significance, even if that difference is meaningless in reality. On the other hand, if the sample is small, even a real effect might not reach significance. So, what should we believe? This contradiction happens because statistical tests rely on probability, not certainty. If you analyze enough data, you'll almost always find something that looks significant. But statistical significance doesn't always mean practical importance. A study might find that a new diet helps people lose 0.001 pounds on average. Technically significant, but completely useless. The problem arises in scientific research all the time. A medical trial might show a significant effect of a drug. But if the effect is tiny, does it actually matter? On the flip side, a smaller study might fail to prove something real just because it didn't have enough data. This paradox reminds us that numbers alone don't tell the full story. Sometimes, what looks like a clear answer is just a side effect of how we measure things. Low birth weight paradox. Babies born underweight tend to have more health risks. But here's where things get strange. When comparing babies of smoking and non-smoking mothers, low birth weight babies of smoking mothers seem to have better survival rates than low birth weight babies of non-smokers. Does smoking somehow help underweight babies? Not at all. The key to this puzzle is how the groups are divided. Babies with low birth weight from non-smoking mothers are often born small due to serious medical complications. But in smoking mothers, many babies are small simply because smoking restricts fetal growth, not necessarily because of life-threatening health conditions. This means the comparison isn't fair. Low birth weight includes both mildly small and critically underweight babies. In the non-smoking group, a larger percentage of low birth weight babies fall into the critical category. This makes it look like smoking improves survival, but it's really just a quirk of grouping the data. This paradox is a warning against jumping to conclusions from statistics. Just because one group appears to have better outcomes doesn't mean the cause is what it seems. Hidden factors can completely flip the story. Will Rogers paradox. A group of students is split into two classes based on test scores, high performers and low performers. Then, one of the lowest scoring students from the top group is moved to the bottom group. Surprisingly, both class averages go up. How is that possible? It works because the student was below average for the high group, but above average for the low group. By moving them, the weaker group gets a boost, and the stronger group loses its weakest link, raising both averages at the same time. This strange effect appears in medical studies too. If patients with mild cases of a disease are reclassified into a low-risk group, both the survival rates of the mild and severe groups may improve, even though no one's health actually changed. It happens in economics, sports, and even geography. The name comes from a joke by Will Rogers, who said that when Oklahomans moved to California, both states got smarter. The lesson: statistics can be deceptive. Changing how groups are defined can create the illusion of improvement, even when nothing has actually changed. Abelson's paradox. A school wants to improve student performance, so it analyzes test scores across different districts. The results show a surprising pattern. No single school seems to have a major impact on overall performance. Instead, the biggest factors appear to be things like student background, family income, and neighborhood conditions. At first glance, this might seem to suggest that schools don't really matter, but that's a misleading conclusion. The paradox arises because when looking at big picture trends, individual influences can get buried under larger societal patterns. Imagine a basketball team where every player trains hard and improves their skills. But if all teams are doing the same, the league's rankings won't change much. That doesn't mean training is useless, it just means progress is happening across the board. This paradox warns against dismissing meaningful individual factors just because they don't show up strongly in broad statistical comparisons. Schools, policies, and personal choices do make a difference, even if large-scale data seems to say otherwise. Accuracy paradox. A factory installs a new quality control system to detect defective products. The company is thrilled when the system reports 99% accuracy in identifying faulty items. But soon, workers notice a problem. Perfectly good products are being thrown away. What's going wrong? The system is too sensitive. It flags so many items as defective that most of the rejected products aren't actually faulty. The company wanted a system that catches all defects, but in doing so, it also mislabels a huge number of good products as bad. This is the accuracy paradox. A system may seem highly accurate when judged by overall numbers, but that doesn't mean it's actually useful. Imagine a fire alarm that goes off every 5 minutes, whether there's a fire or not. It might catch every real fire, but if people start ignoring it, is it really a good alarm? The paradox appears in medical tests, AI models, and even crime prediction tools. A security system might boast high accuracy in detecting criminals, but if it wrongly flags thousands of innocent people, is it really effective? The key lesson is that accuracy alone isn't enough. What matters is how well something actually works in real situations. Bergson's paradox. A tech company is hiring new employees, and you're reviewing the applicants. You notice something odd. Among the people with great technical skills, many have poor communication skills, and among those who are excellent communicators, their technical skills seem weaker. Does this mean that strong technical ability and strong communication are rarely found together? Not necessarily. This could be an example of Bergson's paradox, a statistical illusion caused by selection bias. In this case, the company is only considering applicants who made it through the first round of filtering. If both technical skill and communication skill were necessary to get to this stage, many people who were just average at both were already eliminated. As a result, the remaining candidates create the illusion that the two traits are negatively correlated, even if no such connection exists in the general population. Another example. At an exclusive gym, you might notice that the strongest athletes often seem less flexible, and the most flexible ones don't seem very strong. But outside the gym, plenty of people are neither strong nor flexible. The gym's membership creates a biased dataset, leading to a misleading conclusion. This paradox shows how filtering data can make two unrelated traits seem connected when they aren't. It reminds us that what we observe is often shaped by hidden biases in how the data is selected. Friedman's paradox. A researcher wants to find out what makes people happy. They collect data on dozens of factors: diet, exercise, sleep, income, social life, even favorite color. After running statistical tests, they discover something surprising. People who prefer the color blue report significantly higher happiness levels. But is this really a meaningful connection, or just a statistical illusion? This is Friedman's paradox, which shows how analyzing too many variables at once can accidentally produce misleading results. When researchers test a large number of factors against an outcome, some of them will appear to be significant just by chance, even if no real relationship exists. Imagine rolling a die 10 times and getting 3 sixes in a row. It might seem like something special is happening, but with enough rolls, patterns like this will inevitably appear. Similarly, in large data sets, random noise can mimic meaningful patterns, tricking us into believing there's a real effect. In science, this paradox is a big problem when researchers don't properly account for false positives, mistakenly identifying a connection where none exists. It explains why some studies report bizarre correlations, like how eating chocolate is linked to winning Nobel Prizes, or how certain baby names supposedly lead to career success. The paradox reminds us that data can be deceptive. Just because two things appear related doesn't mean they actually influence each other. It could just be randomness playing tricks on us. Probsting's paradox. A baseball coach wants to improve his team's performance, so he studies past games to find patterns. He notices that when players swing more aggressively, they tend to score more runs. Excited, he tells his team to start swinging at everything. But strangely, the team's performance doesn't improve. In fact, it gets worse. This is the idea behind Probsting's paradox, which highlights how a strategy that appears beneficial in past data may not actually improve outcomes when intentionally applied. Here's the catch. In the past games, players swung aggressively only when they saw good opportunities, not randomly. Their selective decision-making was what led to higher scores, not just the act of swinging more. By forcing aggression without considering the actual quality of the pitches, the coach removed the very factor that made it successful. This paradox appears in many areas, from business to medicine. A company might notice that highly active customers generate more revenue and decide to push all customers to engage more. But if engagement naturally comes from already interested customers, forcing it won't magically create value. It's a warning against blindly applying patterns from past success. Just because something is associated with a good outcome doesn't mean doing more of it will guarantee the same results. Sleeping Beauty problem. A woman is put to sleep on Sunday and told that a fair coin will be flipped. If it lands on heads, she will be woken up once on Monday. If it lands on tails, she will be woken up twice, once on Monday and again on Tuesday, but with no memory of the previous awakening. Each time she wakes up, she is asked, "What is the probability that the coin landed on heads?" At first glance, the answer seems obvious. 50-50 since the coin is fair, but things get tricky. If it lands on heads, she will wake up once. If it lands on tails, she will wake up twice. That means for every one heads wake up, there are 2 tails wake ups. Since she doesn't know which wake up she's in, many argue the probability of heads should actually be 1/3. This thought experiment splits philosophers and mathematicians into 2 camps. Halfers, who insist the probability is 50%, since the original coin flip hasn't changed, and thirders, who argue that since she experiences twice as many wake-ups on tails, the probability shifts to 1/3. It's a simple setup, but it challenges our understanding of probability, self-awareness, and how information changes our perception of chance. 3 prisoners problem. 3 prisoners, A, B, and C, are told that one of them will be pardoned while the other 2 will be executed. None of them know who will be freed. Prisoner A, hoping to improve his odds, asks the guard for a hint. "You don't have to tell me if I'm the one being spared, but can you at least name one person who will be executed?" Since at least one of B or C must die, the guard reveals one of their names. Let's say B. Now, A reasons that the odds of his survival must have improved. Before, his chances were 1 in 3, but now, with B eliminated, it seems like his odds have increased to 1 in 2. But that's not quite right. In reality, A's odds of survival are still 1 in 3, while C's chances have now jumped to 2 in 3. Why? Because the guard wasn't giving a random name. He was always able to pick one of the 2 doomed prisoners. The act of revealing B's fate didn't randomly assign A a better chance. Instead, it subtly increased the likelihood that C is the one who will be spared. It's a counterintuitive twist on probability, much like the famous Monty Hall problem. What seems like an improvement in A's odds is really just an illusion. Bertrand's box paradox. A game show host presents 3 boxes, each containing 2 coins. One box has 2 gold coins, another has 2 silver coins, and the last one contains 1 gold and 1 silver coin. You randomly pick a box and draw 1 coin. It's gold. Now, what's the probability that the other coin in the box is also gold? At first, it seems like there are only 2 possibilities. You either pick the box with 2 gold coins, or the one with 1 gold and 1 silver. Since only these 2 boxes could have given you a gold coin, you might think there's a 50-50 chance that the other coin is gold. But that's not the case. The trick is in how the gold coin was selected. The box with 2 gold coins had 2 chances to give you a gold coin, while the mixed box had only 1. That means you were twice as likely to have picked from the all-gold box than from the mixed one. Mathematically, this means the probability isn't 50%, but actually 2 out of 3, or about 67%. Even though you had no control over which coin you pulled, the way probability distributes itself changes the outcome. It's a classic example of how our intuition about randomness can be misleading. Just because there are 2 remaining possibilities doesn't mean they are equally likely. Sometimes, probability hides in the details, waiting to surprise us. Bertrand's paradox. A mathematician asks you a simple question. If you randomly draw a chord in a circle, What's the probability that it's longer than the side of an inscribed equilateral triangle? It seems like there should be one clear answer. But here's the twist. Depending on how you define random, you can get completely different probabilities. One method says, pick 2 random points on the circle and connect them. Another method, choose a random point inside the circle and draw a perpendicular chord through it. A third method, pick a random midpoint for the chord and extend it evenly in both directions. Each of these methods seems reasonable, yet they lead to 3 completely different probabilities: 1/3, 1/2, and 1/4. How can there be multiple correct answers to the same question? The paradox exposes a fundamental problem in probability. What does it actually mean for something to be random? In everyday life, randomness seems simple, like rolling dice or flipping a coin. But in more complex scenarios, defining randomness itself becomes tricky. This paradox isn't just a mathematical puzzle. It challenges the very foundations of probability theory. Without a universal rule for choosing the correct way to define randomness, probability can give contradictory answers to the same question. It's a reminder that in mathematics, even the simplest ideas can become surprisingly complicated. False positive paradox. A medical test says you have a rare disease. Panic sets in. But wait, what if the test is wrong? Even if it's 99% accurate, there's a surprising twist that could mean you're actually healthy. Here's the catch. The disease is extremely rare, affecting only 1 in 10,000 people. The test correctly identifies sick patients 99% of the time, and correctly clears healthy people 99% of the time. That sounds pretty reliable, until you do the math. Imagine 10,000 people get tested. Since only 1 person statistically has the disease, the test will likely catch them. But here's the problem. 1% of the 9,999 healthy people will also test positive. That's about 100 false positives. So out of roughly 101 positive results, only 1 is actually sick. That means if you test positive, your actual chance of having the disease isn't 99%, it's only about 1%. This paradox reveals a blind spot in human intuition. We tend to assume a high accuracy rate means a test is reliable for any individual case. But when the thing being tested for is extremely rare, false positives pile up, making the results misleading. It's why doctors don't diagnose based on a single test, but consider additional factors like symptoms, family history, and follow-up tests. In a world filled with probabilities, the numbers don't just tell a story. How you interpret them makes all the difference. Intransitive dice. Suppose you're in a high-stakes dice game and you get to pick first. 3 special dice sit in front of you, red, blue, and green. Each has a different set of numbers, and your goal is simple. Pick the best one. But here's the twist. No single die is the best. Suppose the red die beats the blue die most of the time. Easy choice, right? But then strangely, the blue die beats the green die. So surely the red die must also beat the green die. Except it doesn't. The green die beats the red die instead. This creates a loop. Red beats blue, blue beats green, and green beats red. Like a game of rock, paper, scissors with dice. No die is the strongest overall, even though each seems better than another. This is called intransitivity. In most games, if A is better than B, and B is better than C, then A should also be better than C. But here, the logic breaks. This strange property means that if your opponent picks first, you can always pick a die that has a statistical edge over theirs. Yet if they get to counterpick, they can do the same to you. This paradox isn't just a mathematical curiosity. It appears in real-world scenarios, from sports rankings to voting systems, where choices don't always follow a neat hierarchy. Sometimes, winning isn't about having the best option, but about knowing the system better than your opponent. Ant on a rubber rope. Picture an ant, tiny but determined, crawling along a rubber rope. It starts at one end, moving forward at a steady pace. But here's the twist. The rope is stretching. Every second, it gets longer and longer, making the ant's journey seemingly impossible. No matter how far it crawls, the destination keeps moving away. So, will the ant ever reach the other end? At first glance, it seems hopeless. If the rope keeps expanding, shouldn't the ant be stuck forever? Surprisingly, the answer is no. The ant can make it, given enough time. Here's why. Even though the rope stretches, the ant is still making progress, however tiny. Each step it takes covers a fraction of the total length. As the rope expands, that fraction shrinks, but it never fully disappears. Over time, these small gains add up, slowly but surely pushing the ant toward its goal. The paradox plays with intuition. We assume that if something keeps getting farther away, it must be unreachable. But when progress, no matter how small, is steady and cumulative, surprising outcomes emerge. In mathematical terms, this is a problem of infinite sums, where even an incredibly slow-moving process can eventually succeed. So, while the ant's journey may take an unimaginably long time, patience wins in the end. It's a reminder that persistence, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can lead to success. Necktie paradox. You and your friend make a simple bet. Each of you receives a necktie as a gift, but you don't know which one is more expensive. The bet? Whoever has the cheaper necktie must give it to the other. Now, you start thinking, should you take this bet? At first glance, it seems like you have a 50-50 chance of winning or losing. But then, a strange argument makes it look like you're guaranteed to win. Here's the reasoning. You assume your necktie has some unknown value, say X. That means your friend's necktie either costs more or less than X. If theirs is more expensive, you gain a better necktie. If theirs is cheaper, they're the one losing out, not you. So no matter what, it feels like you should always take the bet. But wait, your friend can use the exact same reasoning. That means both of you believe you have the advantage, even though one of you must be wrong. This creates a paradox. Logically, you can't both have an expected gain, but the reasoning seems sound from either perspective. The problem arises because probability and expectation are being misapplied in a way that leads to an illusion of a guaranteed win. The lesson? Sometimes seemingly airtight logic can still lead to absurd conclusions. Just because reasoning feels correct doesn't mean it always is, especially when probability is involved. All horses are the same color. At a horse farm, someone makes a bold claim. All horses are the same color. Sounds ridiculous, right? But what if they claim they can prove it with logic? Here's the so-called proof. It starts with a simple idea. If you have only one horse, of course, all horses in that group are the same color. That's obvious. Now, let's assume that for any group of horses of size n, all of them are the same color. This is the key assumption. Then, if we take a group of n plus 1 horses, we can divide them into 2 overlapping groups, one with the first n horses, and another with the last n horses. According to our assumption, all horses in the first group have the same color, and all in the second group do too. Since these two groups overlap, at least one horse is in both, meaning all n plus 1 horses must share the same color. By this reasoning, no matter how many horses there are, they must all be the same color. But clearly, that's nonsense. So where does the argument fail? The trick is in the step where we assume the overlap works for any n. It works for larger groups, but not when n equals 1. If you only have 2 horses, there's no guarantee they share a common horse in both subgroups. That missing link breaks the logic, exposing the flaw in the proof. Even airtight logic can unravel if the foundation is shaky. Kramer's paradox. You're given 2 different equations, each describing a curve on a sheet of paper. You're told these curves will intersect at a few points, perhaps 2, maybe 3. That sounds reasonable, but now, someone claims that 2 seemingly random curves can have as many as 4 intersections, sometimes even more. How is that possible? This is the puzzle at the heart of a mathematical mystery. Normally, 2 curves should meet in a predictable number of places based on their complexity. A straight line and a circle, for example, can intersect at most twice. But when dealing with higher degree equations, strange things happen. Kramer's paradox shows that 2 different curves, each defined by a 3rd degree equation, can actually share up to 9 intersection points. That seems absurd. How can 2 distinct curves meet in so many places? The trick lies in the way equations define curves. Some seemingly different equations can actually describe the same underlying shape. This means that instead of 9 random intersections, the 2 curves might secretly be overlapping in unexpected ways. Kramer's paradox highlights a surprising quirk in algebraic geometry. where the rules of curves and intersections aren't always as straightforward as they seem. It's a reminder that in mathematics, what looks impossible at first can sometimes be explained by deeper, hidden structures. Elevator paradox. You're in a tall building, waiting for the elevator. You press the button, and when the doors finally open, it's almost always going down. Why does it feel like elevators are more likely to be going in the opposite direction of where you want to go? This strange experience is actually a well-known statistical illusion. Imagine a building with 20 floors and an elevator constantly moving up and down. If you pick a random moment to step in, where is the elevator most likely to be? Surprisingly, it's more often in the middle floors, simply because it spends more time there. If the elevator is evenly moving up and down, it will naturally be passing through the mid-floors more frequently than it stops at the top or bottom. Now, if you're in the middle and call the elevator, there's a higher chance it's coming from above rather than below. Why? Because if the elevator is passing through often, it's just statistically more likely to already be on its way down. Meanwhile, if you're on a top or bottom floor, you might feel like you always have to wait longer for an elevator to arrive, since it spends less time lingering in those areas. The paradox tricks our perception. It's not that the elevator hates you. It's just that probability plays games with our expectations. So, next time the elevator seems to be working against you, just remember, it's not bad luck, it's math. Newcomb's paradox. You walk into a room where a mysterious, all-knowing being presents you with two boxes. One is transparent, showing exactly $1,000 inside. The other is opaque and could either be empty or contain a staggering $1 million. You have a choice. Take only the opaque box or take both. But there's a catch. The being has already predicted your decision with perfect accuracy. If it foresaw that you'd take both boxes, it left the opaque one empty. If it predicted you'd take only the opaque box, it placed the $1 million inside. Now you're stuck in a mind-bending dilemma. If the prediction is always right, taking only the opaque box should guarantee the million. But from a purely logical standpoint, the decision has already been made, meaning the contents of the box are fixed. Why leave behind the extra $1,000 for nothing? This paradox splits people into two camps. One group argues that trusting the predictor leads to the best reward. The other insists that since the prediction is already made, taking both boxes is the rational choice. Yet, if you think that way, you'll always end up with less. The paradox challenges our understanding of free will, logic, and decision-making. Do we trust the prediction and take a leap of faith? Or do we reason through the problem and risk missing out on a fortune? Interesting number paradox. What's the most boring number you can think of? Maybe 172 or 3049? Well, here's the twist. There's no such thing as a boring number. And that's where the paradox begins. Imagine making a list of all the interesting numbers, like 1, the first natural number, 7, a lucky number, or 42, famous in pop culture. Eventually, you'd come across a number that seems completely unremarkable. But hold on, this number would then be the smallest uninteresting number, which is actually a very interesting fact about it. So, it has to be included in the list. Now, the problem repeats itself. Once you add that number, another smallest uninteresting number emerges. But as soon as you notice it, it becomes interesting too. This process continues forever, meaning every number must be interesting in some way. The paradox suggests that the concept of a truly boring number is impossible. Of course, in real life, some numbers feel duller than others. But mathematically, the moment you try to define a number as uninteresting, it gains an interesting property, its own lack of interesting properties. It's a clever paradox that plays with our perception of meaning and classification. So, if you ever feel unremarkable, remember, if even numbers can't be boring, neither can you. Potato paradox. A farmer carries 100 kilograms of freshly harvested potatoes, which are 99% water. After leaving them in the sun to dry, their water content drops to 98%. That doesn't sound like a big change, right? But here's the shocker. The potatoes now weigh only 50 kilograms. How did losing just 1% of water result in losing half the total weight? Here's how the paradox works. Initially, the potatoes are 99% water, meaning only 1%, or 1 kilogram, is actual solid potato. The remaining 99 kilograms is water. After drying, the potatoes are now 98% water. But this means the solid potato, still 1 kilogram, must make up 2% of the total weight. So, what number does the total weight have to be for 1 kilogram to be 2% of it? The answer? 50 kilograms. That's why the weight drops dramatically. The small change in water percentage means the total mass must shrink significantly. This paradox tricks our intuition because we don't usually think about percentages in relative terms. A 1% drop in water content seems tiny, but since the potatoes were almost all water to begin with, that 1% represents a huge proportion of the total weight. It's a great reminder that percentages can be deceptive, especially when dealing with things that are mostly one component, whether it's potatoes, statistics, or even body composition. Banach-Tarski paradox. You start with a single orange. Now, what if I told you that by cutting it into a few oddly shaped pieces and rearranging them, without stretching or adding anything, you could get 2 identical oranges, each the same size as the original? Sounds impossible, right? That's exactly the mind-bending idea behind this paradox. In mathematics, there's a bizarre result that says you can take a solid sphere, divide it into a finite number of pieces, and reassemble those pieces into 2 spheres, both the same size as the first. No magic, no stretching, just pure logic. Of course, in the real world, this trick wouldn't work with actual oranges. That's because the way we normally cut things follows the laws of physics. But in the realm of pure mathematics, objects can be broken into infinitely complex, unmeasurable pieces. Pieces so strange that they defy our usual rules about volume and size. This paradox is a consequence of how infinity works in higher mathematics. It relies on a deep, counterintuitive property of space that shows how breaking things into infinitely detailed parts can lead to seemingly impossible results. So, while you can't double your fruit at home, the paradox reveals something stunning. Our everyday intuition about size and shape doesn't always apply in the abstract world of mathematics. And sometimes, reality is a lot stranger than it seems. Parondo's paradox. Picture this. You're in a casino where every game is rigged against you. No matter how you play, the odds ensure you'll lose money over time. But what if I told you that by cleverly switching between 2 losing games, you could actually start winning? Sounds impossible, right? That's the strange reality of Parondo's paradox. It's like flipping between 2 bad strategies and somehow ending up with a good outcome. Here's how it works. Suppose you have 2 games. Game A is a straightforward losing game, maybe a slightly unfair coin toss where you lose more often than you win. Game B is trickier. It switches between being a winnable game and a losing one based on how much money you currently have. If you play either game by itself long enough, you'll eventually go broke. But here's the twist. If you alternate between them in the right pattern, say, playing A a few times, then B, then repeating, something surprising happens. The combined losses from each individual game don't just cancel out, they actually reverse. The net effect is that you start winning. This paradox appears in real-world situations, like economics, genetics, and even business strategies. Sometimes, alternating between 2 bad choices can lead to success, because the interaction between them creates unexpected advantages. Parondo's paradox reminds us that randomness and strategy can work together in surprising ways. Even when all options look like losing bets, the right sequence can flip the game in your favor. Coastline paradox. How long is the coastline of Britain? Seems like a simple question, right? Just grab a map, trace the outline, and measure. But here's the catch. There's no single answer. The length actually depends on how closely you measure it. Imagine you start with a rough outline using a ruler 100 kilometers long. The coastline might seem fairly smooth, and you get one total length. But now, replace that with a 10-kilometer stick. Suddenly, you capture more of the smaller bays and curves, and the total length increases. Use an even smaller measuring tool, and the length grows again. The closer you zoom in, the more detail you uncover. Tiny inlets, rocky edges, and jagged cliffs. If you keep reducing your measuring unit, the coastline's length could theoretically approach infinity. This is the coastline paradox. The measured length of a coastline depends on the scale of measurement, and there's no single fixed answer. It's because coastlines, like many natural shapes, are fractal-like. They don't have smooth, simple edges, but endless complexity at every level of magnification. This paradox isn't just a curiosity, it has real-world implications. It affects cartography, where maps must simplify coastlines, and even physics, where scientists deal with fractal-like structures in nature. Precise measurement, it turns out, isn't always possible when nature plays by different rules. Green paradox. Suppose a government announces a future ban on fossil fuels to fight climate change. That should be great news for the environment, right? But instead of slowing down, oil companies start drilling faster than ever. Why? Because if their product will soon be worthless, they'd rather sell it all now, while they still can. This is the green paradox. It suggests that well-intended environmental policies can backfire, making climate change worse in the short term. By announcing stricter regulations or future bans, policymakers unintentionally create a rush to extract and burn fossil fuels before restrictions take effect. Think of it like a clearance sale. If a store announces that everything will be banned next year, people will panic buy today. The same happens with fossil fuel suppliers. They flood the market before their assets become stranded. The result? More carbon emissions, accelerating the very crisis the policy aimed to prevent. This paradox highlights the challenge of transitioning away from fossil fuels. If governments want to reduce emissions, they need to design policies that don't just delay extraction, but actually discourage it. That could mean immediate carbon taxes or incentives for clean energy now, not later. The green paradox reminds us that good intentions aren't always enough. When dealing with global problems, timing and strategy matter just as much as the solution itself. Gabriel's horn. Picture yourself painting a long, twisting trumpet that stretches endlessly into the distance. You dip your brush, ready to cover its entire surface. But here's the catch. You can't. No matter how much paint you have, it's mathematically impossible. This bizarre object is called Gabriel's horn, and it defies common sense. It's a three-dimensional shape created by rotating the curve y equals 1x around the x-axis, starting from x equals 1 and extending forever. The result? A shape with infinite length, tapering towards zero, yet somehow enclosing a finite volume. That's the paradox. You can pour a limited amount of paint inside Gabriel's horn and fill it completely. But if you try to paint its outer surface, you'll need infinite paint. How can something have a surface that stretches forever but contain a limited space inside? The answer lies in how area and volume behave differently in mathematics. The surface area, when calculated, diverges to infinity, meaning it never stops growing. But the volume, though extending infinitely, shrinks rapidly enough that its total sum stays finite. It's a strange reality where infinity doesn't always behave as expected. This paradox challenges our intuition about size and measurement, showing that what seems physically impossible can still be mathematically true. It's a perfect example of how infinity is full of surprises. Hausdorff paradox. Think about a perfectly solid marble sphere. Now what if I told you that by cutting it into a finite number of pieces and rearranging them, without stretching or changing their shape, you could end up with two identical spheres the same size as the original? It sounds absurd, but that's exactly what the Hausdorff paradox suggests. This paradox, like the Banach-Tarski paradox, emerges from the strange properties of infinity in higher dimensions. The key lies in how certain sets of points in three-dimensional space behave. By carefully selecting and dividing the sphere into these special, non-measurable subsets, you can rearrange them in such a way that you seemingly create something from nothing. Of course, this doesn't work in the physical world. Atoms and molecules don't obey the same rules as abstract mathematical points. But in pure mathematics, where infinity is unrestricted, results like this defy common sense and force us to reconsider fundamental ideas about space and measurement. Ultimately, the Hausdorff paradox is a striking example of how mathematics can produce results that, while logically sound, challenge our intuitive understanding of reality. It's a glimpse into a world where the impossible suddenly becomes possible. Nicodemus set. Imagine walking across a field, but no matter which way you step, you always land on grass, never on a clear path. Now take that idea to the world of geometry, where you can somehow draw a shape that stretches infinitely in every direction, yet still remains nearly invisible. Welcome to the mind-bending world of the Nicodemus set. This bizarre mathematical object exists within a square, yet every single direction contains a full line passing through it. Despite this, the set's area can be made as close to zero as you want. It's like a shape that extends everywhere, but barely takes up any space. How is this possible? The trick lies in how these lines are arranged. Instead of forming a dense solid mass, they are spread out in an intricate way, avoiding full coverage of the space. The result is a paradoxical structure. Large, in the sense that it touches every direction, but small, in that it occupies almost no measurable area. The Nicodim set challenges our basic intuition about space and size. It's a reminder that in higher mathematics, objects can exist everywhere and nowhere at the same time, revealing just how strange geometry can be. Thomson's lamp. You have a lamp with a simple rule. Every time you press the switch, it flips between on and off. But now, let's speed things up in a bizarre way. First, you flip the switch after 1 minute, then 30 seconds later, then 15 seconds later. The time between flips keeps shrinking, but you still manage to press the switch infinitely many times within just 2 minutes. Now here's the question. At exactly 2 minutes, is the lamp on or off? At first, it seems like there should be an answer. After all, every flip has a clear effect. But let's think deeper. If the lamp was on before the final flip, it must now be off. But if it was off before, it must now be on. The problem? There is no final flip. They go on forever. This is Thomson's lamp paradox, a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of infinity and time. Mathematically, the number of flips is infinite, yet it happens in a finite amount of time. The closer you get to the 2-minute mark, the lamp keeps changing state, but at exactly 2 minutes, there's no obvious answer. This paradox reveals a strange tension between infinite sequences and reality. It forces us to ask, can an infinite process ever truly complete? Or does it break our logic when we try to force a final answer? Motivation crowding theory. You're completely lost in the joy of painting, creating art purely for the fun of it. No deadlines, no pressure, just passion. But then, someone offers to pay you for every painting you complete. At first, it seems like a dream. You're getting rewarded for something you already love. But over time, something shifts. The excitement fades. Painting starts feeling like a job, and when the payments stop, so does your motivation. This is the paradox of how external rewards can sometimes reduce intrinsic motivation rather than enhance it. When people naturally love doing something, whether it's creating, learning, or helping others, introducing an external incentive can shift their focus. What was once an enjoyable activity starts feeling like an obligation, leading to less enthusiasm and even a drop in performance. This effect appears everywhere, at work, in schools, even in parenting. A child who loves reading for fun might lose interest once rewarded for it, seeing books as just another task to complete. A company offering bonuses for teamwork might actually make employees less cooperative, as they focus more on the reward than the work itself. It's a paradox, because rewards are supposed to increase motivation, yet they often replace deeper, personal reasons for acting. Instead of feeling like something we want to do, tasks start feeling like something we have to do. The challenge is knowing when incentives will truly boost motivation and when they'll accidentally take the fun out of it. 58th, navigation paradox. You're cruising down the highway, making great time, until, out of nowhere, traffic grinds to a halt. Checking your GPS, you realize the problem. Everyone else is following the same, fastest route. What was supposed to be a shortcut has become a jam-packed bottleneck. This paradox highlights a strange problem in optimization. When a few people use a strategy, whether it's navigation apps, airline flight paths, or stock market trading, it works as expected. But when everyone adopts the same, best approach, it can cause systemic breakdowns, making conditions worse instead of better. In aviation, for example, pilots follow pre-planned routes to maximize efficiency and safety. But if all aircraft rely on the same optimization logic, air traffic can become more congested, reducing efficiency overall. The same principle applies to self-driving cars, financial markets, and even internet bandwidth, systems that should be smoother break down when too many people follow the same guidance. This paradox reminds us that strategies that work on an individual level don't always scale. A tool designed to help us navigate complexity can, ironically, create more of it. Sometimes thinking independently, not just following the algorithm, is the real key to avoiding gridlock. Bernadette's paradox. You set out on a long walk, confident that nothing stands in your way. But as you move forward, an invisible force seems to hold you back. Not through physical barriers, but through a strange sequence of events that never quite happen. Welcome to Bernadette's paradox. Imagine a road lined with an infinite number of archers. Each one follows a simple rule. They will only fire their arrow if you are about to reach them. At first, nothing happens. But as soon as you approach the first archer, he readies his bow, forcing you to stop. Yet here's the twist. If you never reached him, he never had a reason to shoot in the first place. So, what actually stopped you? No arrow was fired, no force physically blocked you, yet somehow you couldn't move forward. You were trapped not by a real obstacle, but by the mere anticipation of infinite actions that never took place. This paradox challenges how we think about causality and infinity. Can an endless chain of potential events create a real barrier, even if nothing ever actually happens? It's a mind-bending contradiction that suggests sometimes motion can be stopped by nothing at all. Grim Reaper paradox. At the stroke of midnight, an unseen force has already sealed your fate. An army of Grim Reapers, each assigned a precise moment before sunrise to decide whether you live or die. But here's where logic begins to unravel. There are infinitely many of them, and their schedule keeps halving. The first Reaper is set to act at 1 a.m., the next at 12:30 a.m., then 12:15 a.m., and so on, their appearances stacking infinitely toward midnight. Each Reaper follows a simple rule. If you're still alive when their moment arrives, they will strike you down instantly. The paradox? No Reaper should ever get their turn. Take the Reaper at 1 a.m. He will only act if no Reaper before him has already done so. But the same logic applies to the 12:30 a.m. Reaper, the 12:15 a.m. Reaper, and all the others compressing backward toward midnight. Each depends on the hesitation of an earlier one, but there is no first Reaper to start the chain. This paradox forces us to rethink causality and infinity. If your death is inevitable, which Reaper delivers the fatal blow? The answer appears to be none of them, yet somehow you still don't survive. It's a chilling puzzle where an infinite army ensures your doom, yet paradoxically, not a single one of them can be blamed. Grandy series. Imagine two equally strong teams playing tug-of-war. The first team pulls the rope forward one step, but right after, the second team pulls it back. This back-and-forth struggle continues forever, forward, backward. Now ask yourself, where does the rope end up after infinite pulls? If you stop at any moment, the rope is either one step forward or back. But since the pulling never stops, it never settles in one place. However, if you step back and look at the overall pattern, the rope isn't favoring either side. It's spending equal time moving forward and backward. Surprisingly, if you average out its position over time, the answer isn't forward or backward, but right in the middle. This is exactly how Grandy's series works. 1 minus 1 plus 1 minus 1 plus 1 minus 1. Keep switching between 1 and 0. Never landing on a final answer. But if you consider the overall trend, it balances out to 1.5 in certain mathematical contexts. It's a paradox that shows how infinity can behave in unexpected ways. Sometimes, a never-ending struggle leads to a result that seems impossible at first glance. Ross Littlewood paradox. You start with an empty bucket and an endless supply of numbered balls. Every minute, you drop in 10 balls, labelled 1 through 10, then 11 through 20, and so on. But there's a catch. Each time you add 10, you also remove the ball with the lowest number. What happens as time stretches to infinity? At first glance, the bucket should be filling up. After all, you're constantly adding more balls than you remove. But look closer. Every single ball you add eventually gets taken out. Ball 1 is removed in the first minute, ball 2 in the second, ball 3 in the third, and so on. No matter how high a number, each ball has a set moment when it will be plucked from the bucket. So, after an infinite amount of time, what's left? Surprisingly, nothing. The bucket is empty. But how can that be? If you're always adding more than you take away, Shouldn't there be an infinite number of balls left? The paradox lies in the way infinity works. The process never runs out of balls to remove, meaning that despite infinitely many additions, every single ball eventually disappears. This paradox challenges our intuition about accumulation and infinite sequences. Sometimes, even when you're endlessly adding, you still end up with nothing at all. Coin rotation paradox. Think of placing a coin on a table and rolling an identical coin around its edge without slipping. How many times will the moving coin rotate before it completes one full trip around the stationary coin? Your intuition might say once. After all, the moving coin only travels a distance equal to its own circumference. But here's the paradox. The moving coin actually makes 2 full rotations. It seems impossible at first. The trick lies in realizing that as the coin rolls, it not only moves along the outer edge, but also rotates due to its own movement. When rolling in a straight line, a coin completes 1 full turn after traveling a distance equal to its circumference. But in this case, the rolling coin is also following a curved path around the stationary coin, adding an extra rotation. You can test this yourself. Take 2 identical bottle caps, press one down on a table, and roll the other around it. Watch closely. It makes 2 full turns before completing the loop. The paradox plays with our expectations about motion and rotation. While it feels like the rolling coin should rotate just once, the combination of rolling distance and curved motion doubles the effect. This is a perfect example of how our intuition can sometimes betray us when dealing with seemingly simple mechanics. What feels obvious isn't always correct, especially when circles start playing tricks on us. Hooper's paradox. Imagine cutting a square into 4 pieces, rearranging them, and somehow ending up with a rectangle that has more area than what you started with. Sounds impossible, right? That's exactly the mind-bending trick behind Hooper's paradox. Picture this. You take a square, carefully slice it into 4 oddly shaped pieces, and then shift them around like a puzzle. Suddenly, you're left with a rectangle that appears to have extra space. No gaps, no overlapping, just a bigger shape out of nowhere. But how can rearranging the same pieces create more area? The secret lies in tiny, almost imperceptible distortions. When the pieces are rearranged, what looks like a perfect rectangle is actually slightly off. The edges don't align perfectly, creating minuscule gaps or overlaps that are hard to spot. These small errors add up, creating the illusion of extra area. This paradox is a cousin to other famous missing area puzzles, where clever slicing and rearranging make objects appear to gain or lose space. It exploits our natural tendency to trust visual continuity, tricking our brains into seeing a mathematical impossibility. So, while it might seem like you've magically created extra space, no laws of physics have been broken, just a clever deception in geometry. It's a perfect example of how our eyes can be fooled, even when dealing with something as seemingly rigid as simple shapes and numbers. Sphere reversion. What if I to turn a sphere inside out, without cutting, tearing, or creating sharp creases? Sounds impossible, right? Normally, flipping an object like a sock works, because you can stretch and fold the fabric. But a perfect, smooth sphere? That seems like a no-go, and yet, according to mathematics, it is possible. This is the bizarre world of sphere inversion, where a sphere can be turned inside out through a series of smooth deformations, without ever breaking the surface. It's as if you could take a basketball and somehow flip it, so the inner side becomes the outer side, all while keeping it perfectly intact. But how does this work? The trick lies in allowing the sphere to pass through itself in a very controlled way. While everyday objects would crumple or tear, mathematical surfaces can be deformed in ways that our intuition struggles to grasp. Specially designed corridors form in the shape, allowing different parts of the sphere to slip past each other smoothly. One of the most famous visual demonstrations of this came from computer animations showing the process in action. As the sphere morphs, it develops strange-looking twists, loops, and bends before magically settling into an inside-out version of itself. This paradox challenges our fundamental understanding of geometry and motion. In the strange world of higher mathematics, things that seem impossible, like turning a sphere inside out, become reality. It's a reminder that sometimes our intuition is no match for the deeper truths of mathematics. Abilene paradox. Ever found yourself doing something nobody actually wants to do, just because everyone thinks the others want it? That's the Abilene paradox, a mind-bending social trap where groups end up making decisions that nobody individually supports. Picture this. It's a hot summer afternoon, and a family is sitting comfortably at home. One person casually suggests, "Maybe we should drive to Abilene for dinner?" No one is particularly excited, but not wanting to be the party pooper, they all agree. Hours later, exhausted and sweaty, they return home, only to realize nobody actually wanted to go in the first place. Each person assumed the others were in favor and went along to avoid rocking the boat. This paradox reveals a strange flaw in human decision-making. Sometimes people agree to things they dislike just to avoid conflict, when, ironically, everyone feels the same way. It happens in businesses, relationships, and even politics. A team might pursue a bad idea because no one wants to be the one to object, only to later discover everyone had the same doubts. So how do we escape the Abilene paradox? By breaking the cycle of silent assumptions. If someone had just asked, "Wait, does anyone actually want to go?" the whole unnecessary trip could have been avoided. It's a reminder that honest communication isn't just useful, it's essential for making choices that truly reflect what people want. Apportionment paradox. You're slicing a pizza among friends, carefully trying to make sure everyone gets a fair share. But as you divide it up, something strange happens. Changing how you cut the slices actually affects how much some people get. This surprising issue is at the heart of the apportionment paradox, a mathematical quirk that makes fair distribution much trickier than it seems. Now, let's apply this to something bigger. Seats in a legislature. Suppose a country has 100 seats to distribute among different regions based on population. You use a mathematical formula to assign them fairly, but as soon as the population shifts, weird things happen. A state with more people could end up with fewer seats, or adding an extra seat might cause a region to lose one. This paradox, seen in real-world elections, reveals that no perfect method exists for distributing seats without some unintended side effects. One example is the Alabama paradox, where increasing the total number of seats in Congress once caused a state to lose a seat instead of gaining one. Another version, the population paradox, shows how a state growing faster than another can end up with fewer representatives. These odd outcomes reveal a deeper issue. Fairness in numbers isn't as simple as it seems. Even carefully designed systems can lead to counterintuitive results, challenging our assumptions about equality and representation. The apportionment paradox is a reminder that mathematics, when applied to the real world, doesn't always behave the way we expect. Arrow's paradox. Imagine you and your friends are deciding where to eat. You all rank your preferences. Some favor sushi, others prefer burgers, and a few vote for pizza. To keep things fair, you use a voting system to determine the best choice. But no matter how the votes are counted, strange inconsistencies appear. This is what Kenneth Arrow discovered when analyzing voting systems. He proved that with 3 or more choices, no ranking method can always be fair. Ideally, a good system should respect individual preferences, be consistent, and not let one person decide everything. However, when you try to meet all these conditions, contradictions emerge. For instance, imagine the group decides that sushi is better than burgers, and burgers are better than pizza. But when votes are analyzed a different way, pizza somehow ends up ranked higher than sushi. The preferences loop back on themselves, making it impossible to find a true winner. This paradox has huge implications beyond just dinner plans. It shows that no election method is perfect, whether it's for political offices, award shows, or even committee decisions. The way votes are counted can change the final outcome in surprising ways. So the next time you struggle to pick a restaurant, just remember, even in theory, there's no perfect way to choose. Buridan's ass. Think of a hungry donkey standing exactly between 2 identical piles of hay. The donkey is rational. It always chooses what's best for itself. But here's the problem. Both haystacks are equally good, equally close, and equally appealing. Unable to find a reason to prefer one over the other, the donkey hesitates. and starves. This thought experiment, known as Buridan's ass, highlights a paradox in decision-making. It suggests that if a perfectly rational being has two identical choices, it may never make a decision at all. After all, if there's no logical reason to pick one over the other, how could it ever choose? Of course, in reality, a donkey would eventually move, even if by accident. But the paradox raises an interesting question about human decision-making. Have you ever been stuck picking between two equally great options, like two job offers, two vacation destinations, or two equally delicious flavors of ice cream? If you overthink it, you might never decide. This paradox challenges the idea that rational decision-making always leads to action. It suggests that sometimes external factors like instinct, randomness, or even emotions are necessary to break the tie. So, if you ever find yourself frozen between two choices, remember, overanalyzing can sometimes lead to no decision at all. Maybe the best answer is simply to pick one and move forward. Chain store paradox. Let's say you own a chain of 100 stores, each in a different town. A competitor wants to open a store in every town, directly challenging you. You have two choices each time: fight back aggressively to drive them out, or peacefully coexist. Now, let's think backward. If they reach the last town, there's no reason to fight. It's the last one, so you might as well accept competition. But if you wouldn't fight in the last town, why fight in the second to last? You'd still be left with almost all your stores. By this logic, working backward, you end up never resisting, so the competitor moves in everywhere. But wait. If you look at it differently, fighting early on establishes a reputation. If the competitor knows you'll put up a fight, they might not even try to enter most towns. This is the paradox. Pure logic suggests you should never fight, yet strategic thinking suggests early resistance is crucial. The chain store paradox challenges our ideas of rational decision-making. A completely logical approach might leave you vulnerable, while a seemingly irrational strategy, fighting when it's not necessary, could actually be the smartest move. It's a reminder that decisions aren't always about cold calculations. Reputation, perception, and long-term strategy all play a role. Sometimes what seems irrational in the short term is actually the winning strategy in the long run. Decision-making paradox. Suppose you're at an ice cream shop, staring at 31 flavors. You love chocolate, but cookies and cream looks tempting. Oh, but what about caramel swirl? The more you think, the harder it gets to decide. This is the decision-making paradox. The idea that having more choices should make decisions easier, but in reality, it often makes them harder. Instead of feeling empowered, you feel stuck. Why? Because with every option you pick, you're also rejecting dozens of others. What if one of those was better? Economists and psychologists have studied this paradox for years. Logically, more choices should help us make better decisions, allowing us to tailor our selection to our exact preferences. But in practice, too many choices create anxiety. The fear of making the wrong decision or missing out on something better leads to hesitation or even complete paralysis. This paradox applies far beyond ice cream. Job offers, vacation destinations, even scrolling through endless TV shows. More options don't always mean better decisions. In fact, studies show that people are often happier when given fewer choices. So, what's the solution? Some experts suggest limiting options up front, trusting intuition, or setting simple decision rules. The paradox teaches us that while choice is valuable, too much of it can turn freedom into frustration. Sometimes the best decision is just to pick one and enjoy it, before you get lost in an endless loop of second-guessing. Fenno's paradox. Every election cycle, people complain about politicians. Congress is a mess. The system is broken. Yet, somehow, the same politicians keep getting re-elected. How does that make sense? Welcome to Fenno's paradox. This paradox highlights a strange contradiction. While most people distrust Congress as a whole, they tend to like their own representative. The approval ratings for Congress can sink to historic lows, yet individual lawmakers often remain popular in their home districts. But why? One reason is that politicians focus on local issues. They shake hands, attend town halls, and bring funding to their districts, making voters feel personally connected. Meanwhile, national politics seem distant and dysfunctional. Voters blame Congress as a group, but see their representative as one of the good ones. Another reason is partisanship. Many people think Congress is ineffective because of the other side, while believing their own representative is fighting the good fight. Fenno's paradox explains why large-scale political change is so difficult. If everyone thinks their own representative deserves to stay, but the system as a whole is flawed, nothing really changes. The paradox suggests that dissatisfaction with government doesn't necessarily translate into action, because ironically, voters may contribute to the very gridlock they dislike. Fredkin's paradox. You're at an ice cream shop torn between two flavors, chocolate and vanilla. You like both equally, and no matter how hard you try, you can't seem to decide. The longer you hesitate, the more frustrating it gets. But here's the twist. If the choice doesn't really matter, why is it so hard to make? This is Fredkin's paradox. It suggests that the harder it is to distinguish between two options, the longer it takes to decide, even though the choice is less important. You'd think big, life-changing decisions would be the hardest, but often, it's the trivial ones that leave us stuck in indecision. Imagine a scientist selecting between two nearly identical microscopes. Since the differences are so small, they spend hours analyzing the details. But if one microscope were obviously superior, the decision would be instant. The paradox reveals that effort in decision-making doesn't always match the stakes. Instead, we agonize over minor choices precisely because they're so balanced. This paradox has real-world implications. Ever spent 20 minutes choosing a movie only to watch something forgettable? Or wasted time debating two similar restaurants when you could have just picked one and enjoyed the meal? Fredkin's paradox shows us that sometimes, the smaller the difference, the harder we think. And maybe, just maybe, we'd be happier if we just picked an option and moved on. Hedgehog's dilemma. Imagine a cold winter night. Two hedgehogs are shivering, so they try to huddle together for warmth. But there's a problem. The closer they get, the more they prick each other with their sharp spines. If they stay apart, they freeze. If they get too close, they hurt each other. This is the hedgehog's dilemma, a metaphor for human relationships. We all crave connection, but emotional closeness comes with risks, disagreements, misunderstandings, or even heartbreak. Stay too distant, and we feel lonely. Get too close, and we risk getting hurt. Think about friendships, family, or romantic relationships. At first, everything seems warm and comfortable, like hedgehogs moving together for warmth. But as people reveal their flaws or past experiences, emotional spines start poking. Some react by pulling away, fearing vulnerability. Others push forward, risking emotional pain. The paradox is that the very thing we need, closeness, also has the potential to cause discomfort. But does that mean we should avoid deep connections? Not necessarily. Just like hedgehogs eventually find the right balance, close enough for warmth, but not too close to hurt, we also learn how to navigate relationships. Setting healthy boundaries and understanding each other's emotional space helps us stay connected without getting pricked. So, the next time a relationship feels challenging, remember the hedgehogs. Some discomfort is natural, but with the right balance, we can stay warm without the pain. Inventor's paradox. You'd think that solving a simple problem would be easier than solving a complex one, right? Well, sometimes the opposite is true. Welcome to the inventor's paradox, a strange idea that suggests tackling a bigger, more ambitious problem can actually be easier than solving a smaller, more specific one. Imagine you're trying to build the perfect paper airplane. You focus on making one design fly as far as possible. You tweak tiny details, folding the wings slightly differently, adjusting the nose, making minor changes. But you keep running into limitations. Now, what if you broadened your goal? Instead of just one design, you explore every possible way to make an object glide through the air. Suddenly, you're open to ideas you never considered, different materials, launching techniques, or even an entirely new shape. By thinking bigger, you might accidentally solve your original problem in a better way than you ever imagined. Mathematician George Polya, who coined this paradox, noticed that generalizing a problem often reveals hidden patterns or more powerful solutions than focusing too narrowly. This applies to everything from engineering to creative work. Sometimes, expanding the scope makes the solution more obvious, not more complicated. So, if you ever feel stuck on a small problem, try zooming out. Ask a bigger question, and you might just find that the answer to your original problem was hiding in a larger solution all along. Kafka's toxin puzzle. Let's say you meet a billionaire who offers you a deal. If you can genuinely intend to drink a harmless but unpleasant toxin tonight, they'll wire you $1 million right now. But there's a twist. You don't actually have to go through with it. Once the money is in your account, there's no consequence if you change your mind. Sounds easy, right? Just plan to drink it, get the cash, then decide not to. But here's where things get tricky. The payment isn't for drinking the toxin, it's for truly intending to. The moment you realize you don't need to follow through, it becomes nearly impossible to form an authentic intention. After all, how can you honestly plan to do something while knowing you won't? This strange loop challenges how we think about intention and rational decision-making. Normally, we assume that intentions lead to actions. But here, the best possible outcome, getting the money without drinking, undermines the very intention required to receive it. Beyond just a thought experiment, this idea has real implications in philosophy, psychology, and even artificial intelligence. It suggests that in some cases, forming a commitment to an action, even when it appears irrational later, might be the only way to achieve a goal. It raises an interesting question. If your future self is going to back out, can you ever truly intend to do something in the first place? Morton's fork. Imagine you're applying for a loan. If you dress well, the lender assumes you're wealthy and don't need the money, so they reject your request. But if you dress poorly, they think you're too broke to pay them back, so they reject your request. No matter what you do, the outcome is the same. This kind of reasoning is an example of a logical trap where both choices lead to the same predetermined conclusion. The term comes from John Morton, a 15th century tax collector for King Henry VII. He argued that if someone lived lavishly, they clearly had enough money to pay higher taxes. But if they lived frugally, they must be saving money, so they could also afford higher taxes. Either way, they had to pay up. You can see this type of flawed reasoning in debates and arguments. If someone is calm while defending themselves, they might be accused of being cold and calculating. But if they get emotional, they must be guilty because they're defensive. Heads, they lose. Tails, they still lose. This paradox highlights how unfair conclusions can be reached when evidence is twisted to fit a narrative, rather than allowing logic to guide the outcome. If both sides of a decision always support the same conclusion, there's a good chance something isn't quite right. When reasoning like this is used, the real choice disappears, leaving only the illusion of one. No-show paradox. Imagine you're voting in an election where 3 candidates are running. You and others rank them in order of preference, and a complex voting system determines the winner. You rank your favorite first, a decent second choice next, and your least favorite last. But then, something strange happens. After the votes are counted, you realize that if you hadn't voted at all, your second choice would have won instead of your least favorite. In other words, by participating and honestly ranking the candidates, you accidentally helped elect the one you liked the least. This bizarre outcome is known as the no-show paradox. It reveals a flaw in certain voting systems where, in rare cases, a voter can improve the overall result by simply staying home. Instead of making a positive impact, casting a ballot backfires. This raises troubling questions. If voting can sometimes make things worse, should people second-guess whether to participate? Does this mean some voting systems unintentionally discourage turnout? And most importantly, is there a perfect way to count votes that avoids these kinds of paradoxes? The no-show paradox highlights how difficult it is to design a truly fair voting system. Even well-intentioned methods can lead to counterintuitive results, where doing nothing is somehow better than engaging in the process. Paradox of voting. Every election season, millions of people head to the polls believing their vote matters. But here's the problem. Mathematically, it almost never does. Think about it. In a national election with millions of voters, the chances that your single vote will be the deciding factor are astronomically small. Even in a local election, the odds of a perfect tie, where your vote actually changes the outcome, are practically zero. Yet, people still vote. This contradiction is known as the paradox of voting. If everyone acted purely rationally, they'd realize that voting has a cost: time, effort, maybe even standing in a long line, while the benefit of changing the outcome is nearly non-existent. In theory, no one should vote at all. And yet, democracy thrives because people do vote. Why? Some argue it's about civic duty. People vote because they believe it's the right thing to do. Others say it's about self-expression, pride, or even social pressure. This paradox highlights the strange divide between rational self-interest and collective responsibility. If too many people thought, "My vote doesn't matter," then no one would vote, and democracy itself would collapse. Ultimately, the paradox of voting reveals that people don't always act based on cold logic. Instead, they are driven by values, emotions, and a belief in something bigger than themselves. Preparedness paradox. Let's say a city spends years preparing for a devastating hurricane. They reinforce buildings, improve drainage systems, and run public safety drills. When the storm finally arrives, the damage is minimal. People start questioning if all that preparation was even necessary. But here's the twist: if they hadn't prepared, the disaster would have been catastrophic. This is the preparedness paradox. The better we prepare for a crisis, the less severe it appears when it happens. Ironically, that success can make people doubt whether the preparation was needed in the first place. Think about vaccines. If a vaccination program prevents an outbreak, people might believe the disease was never a real threat to begin with, or consider heightened security measures. If an attack is prevented, critics may argue there was never any danger. The paradox lies in how prevention makes the problem seem like it was never going to happen at all. This effect can lead to dangerous consequences. When people don't see an immediate threat, they may resist investing in future preparedness. Funding gets cut, safety measures are relaxed, and the cycle resets, leaving society vulnerable to the next disaster. The preparedness paradox reminds us that just because a crisis doesn't happen doesn't mean it was never a real risk. The absence of disaster isn't proof that precautions were unnecessary. It's proof they worked. Prevention paradox. Think of a public health campaign warns that without a new safety measure, thousands of people could die. The measure is implemented, and as a result, only a handful of deaths occur. Instead of celebrating, people start questioning if the measure was necessary at all. This is the prevention paradox. The idea that a successful prevention strategy often makes the problem seem like it was never a real threat in the first place. When a risk is effectively reduced across a population, individuals may not see the immediate benefits and might even believe the precautions were unnecessary. Consider seatbelts. They've saved millions of lives, yet because they work so well, few people personally experience the life or death difference they make. As a result, some question strict seatbelt laws, unaware that their effectiveness is the very reason they seem unimportant. The paradox is especially frustrating for public health officials. Large-scale prevention efforts, like vaccines or anti-smoking campaigns, protect so many people that it can be hard to prove their necessity until they are taken away. If too many people dismiss the need for prevention, society risks backsliding into preventable disasters. The prevention paradox highlights a tough reality. When prevention works, it feels invisible. But that's not a sign it wasn't needed. It's proof it did its job. Voting paradox. Citizens of a town are electing its new mayor. There are 3 candidates, Alex, Bailey, and Casey. Voters rank them in order of preference. Some prefer Alex over Bailey, Bailey over Casey, and Casey over Alex. Seems fair, right? But here's the twist. When the votes are tallied, a bizarre cycle emerges. A majority prefers Alex over Bailey, another majority prefers Bailey over Casey, yet another majority prefers Casey over Alex. The rankings contradict themselves, making it impossible to declare a clear winner. This strange loop is the voting paradox, first discovered by the French philosopher Marquis de Condorcet. It shows that even if each individual voter has a clear preference, the overall group's decision can become an inconsistent mess. It challenges the idea that elections always reflect the will of the people in a straightforward way. The paradox becomes even more troubling in real-world elections. It suggests that depending on how votes are counted or how choices are structured, the outcome can be manipulated without changing anyone's actual opinions. This is why different voting systems, like ranked choice voting or runoffs, exist, each attempting to avoid these weird inconsistencies. At its core, the paradox reveals a flaw in democracy. Collective choices don't always behave logically, even when individual choices do. In the end, the winner of an election might not be the most popular candidate, just the one who best navigated the quirks of the system. Willpower paradox. You sit down to work, determined to be productive. But the more you force yourself to focus, the harder it gets. Your mind drifts, and suddenly, you're scrolling through your phone, wondering where all that willpower went. Strangely, if you had just relaxed a little, you might have gotten more done. This is the willpower paradox, the idea that trying too hard to exert self-control can actually backfire. It suggests that forcing yourself to resist temptation or focus on a task can sometimes make you more likely to fail. The more effort you put into controlling yourself, the more drained you feel, making you even more vulnerable to distraction. Psychologists have found that willpower works a lot like a muscle. If you overuse it, it gets tired, leading to what's called ego depletion. This is why after a long day of making decisions and staying disciplined, you might find it nearly impossible to resist junk food or procrastination. But interestingly, those who see willpower as unlimited tend to perform better. They don't burn out as easily. The paradox challenges the idea that sheer determination is the best way to achieve goals. Instead, sustainable success often comes from smarter strategies, like building habits, pacing yourself, and creating environments that support your goals. Sometimes, the best way to strengthen willpower is to stop relying on it so much. Cool tropics paradox. Picture yourself stepping into a time machine and traveling back 50 million years. You expect sweltering heat everywhere. After all, scientists say the Earth was much warmer back then. But when you arrive in the tropics, you're shocked. It's not that much hotter than today. Something doesn't add up. This is the cool tropics paradox. Geological evidence suggests that during past warm periods, like the Eocene, the poles were almost tropical, with palm trees in Antarctica. Yet, surprisingly, the tropics themselves weren't much warmer than they are now. If greenhouse gases trapped enough heat to melt polar ice caps, why didn't the tropics overheat as well? Climate models struggle to explain this contradiction. According to standard predictions, a warming planet should heat up everywhere, especially near the equator. But ancient temperature records, taken from fossils, deep-sea sediments, and other sources, tell a different story. Some scientists believe that increased cloud cover or ocean currents might have acted like a thermostat, preventing excessive tropical heating. Others suggest that current climate models might be missing key feedback mechanisms that regulate global temperatures. This paradox raises important questions about how Earth's climate system really works. If we still don't fully understand past warming events, how accurately can we predict future climate change? Studying these ancient mysteries could help scientists refine their models, giving us a clearer picture of what lies ahead. Irresistible force paradox. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? It sounds like the setup for an epic showdown, but it's actually a classic paradox that challenges our very understanding of power and resistance. Imagine a warrior wielding a magical spear said to pierce anything in existence. No shield, no armor, nothing can stop it. But now, picture a blacksmith who has crafted the ultimate shield, completely indestructible, capable of blocking any attack. What happens when the warrior thrusts the unstoppable spear at the unbreakable shield? Logically, both claims can't be true at the same time. If the spear is truly unstoppable, it should break through the shield. But if the shield is truly unbreakable, then the spear must fail. The paradox forces us to confront the contradiction. Can something be both absolutely unstoppable and absolutely unmovable? Some argue that the question itself is flawed because it assumes the coexistence of two absolute extremes, which might be logically impossible. Others suggest that if an unstoppable force truly exists, an immovable object simply cannot, and vice versa. In physics, nothing is truly unstoppable or immovable. Everything depends on forces, mass, and motion. At its core, this paradox isn't just about hypothetical weapons. It's a deeper exploration of logical limits. When two absolute powers collide, something has to give, or does it? The moving rows. Let's say two trains passing each other on parallel tracks. One is moving to the right, the other to the left, at the same speed. If you were sitting on one, you'd see the other zoom by twice as fast. Simple, right? Well, what if I told you that ancient Greek philosopher Zeno had a paradox that challenges this idea? The moving rows paradox, one of Zeno's lesser-known puzzles, involves three sets of objects. Picture 3 rows of blocks. The first row is stationary, while the second and third rows move toward each other at equal speed. Now focus on just one block in the moving rows. If you compare it to the stationary row, it takes a certain amount of time to pass one block. But relative to the opposite moving row, it seems to pass 2 blocks in the same amount of time. Here's the problem. If motion is measured in terms of passing objects, then the moving block somehow takes the same amount of time to pass one block as it does to pass 2, an apparent contradiction. Does this mean our understanding of motion is flawed? The paradox highlights a misunderstanding of relative speed in ancient Greek thought. Today, we resolve it using modern physics. Motion is relative, and different frames of reference change the way we perceive speed. But in Zeno's time, the idea that motion could depend on perspective was far from obvious, making this yet another example of how his paradoxes challenged fundamental assumptions. Paradox of place. Where is place? It sounds like a weird question, but think about it. If everything exists in a place, then doesn't that place also need to be inside another place, and that place within yet another? This seemingly endless chain of locations is known as the paradox of place. Suppose you have a box. The box is in your room is in a house, the house is in a city, and the city is on Earth. But where is Earth? In space. And where is space? That's where things get tricky. If everything must be contained within something else, then what contains the universe? And what contains that? This paradox, attributed to Aristotle, raises a fundamental question about the nature of space itself. If every place needs a bigger place to contain it, we either get an infinite regress, or we have to accept that at some point, place just stops making sense. Modern physics tackles this by changing the way we think about space. Rather than existing inside something else, space itself can be a fundamental structure. The universe doesn't need to be inside anything, it simply is. But that answer might not feel entirely satisfying. After all, we're used to everything being somewhere. If the universe isn't contained in something larger, then where is it? The paradox forces us to rethink our basic intuitions about space and existence, showing how even the simplest questions can lead to mind-bending puzzles. Paradox of the grain of millet. Imagine standing in a silent room and dropping a single grain of millet. Would you hear anything? Probably not. Now, what if you dropped a handful? That would make a sound. But here's the problem. If a pile of millet makes noise, and a pile is just many single grains combined, then shouldn't each grain make a sound on its own? This ancient puzzle, credited to the Greek philosopher Zeno, challenges our understanding of perception and logic. Individually, a grain of millet seems too quiet to be heard. But if you combine enough of them, suddenly, the sound becomes noticeable. At what point does silence turn into noise? And if no single grain contributes an audible sound, how does adding more change that? It's a paradox of continuity. Just like how a single drop of water doesn't make a flood, or a single hair doesn't make someone bald. Our brains categorize things in groups, but reality is often a gradual shift rather than a clear distinction. Philosophers use this paradox to question whether things like sound, weight, or even meaning itself are truly measurable in absolute terms. Science suggests that sound waves from a single grain do exist, but they're just too faint for our ears. But does that mean the sound isn't real, or just that we can't perceive it? This simple question about a falling grain reveals how tricky it is to define the boundary between something and nothing. Paradox of tolerance. What if there is a society that prides itself on being completely tolerant, accepting all viewpoints, no matter how extreme? It sounds ideal, right? But here's the twist. What happens when an intolerant group rises within this tolerant society? If tolerance means allowing all beliefs, even those that seek to destroy tolerance itself, then intolerance can spread unchecked. This is the paradox. A society that tolerates everything, including intolerance, may ultimately lose its tolerance altogether. The idea comes from philosopher Karl Popper, who argued that unlimited tolerance leads to the end of tolerance. If extremist or oppressive ideas are given free rein, they can take advantage of open dialogue to silence opposing voices, creating a society where tolerance no longer exists. It's a dilemma that plays out in real life. Should a democratic society allow anti-democratic movements? Should free speech protect those who use it to incite hatred? If intolerance is tolerated, it can grow strong enough to dismantle the very freedoms that allowed it to exist. The paradox suggests that in order to preserve tolerance, a society may need to draw the line somewhere, refusing to accept those who seek to undermine it. But then comes the tricky part. Where should that line be drawn? And who decides? It's a problem with no simple answer, but one thing is clear. Absolute tolerance isn't as straightforward as it seems. Without limits, it risks undoing itself. Paradox of hedonism. Some people spend their lives chasing happiness, convinced that if they just have the right job, the perfect vacation, or the ideal lifestyle, they'll finally feel fulfilled. But strangely, the more they focus on happiness itself, the more elusive it becomes. This is the paradox. Pursuing pleasure too directly can actually make it harder to attain. Consider someone who constantly asks themselves, "Am I happy yet?" That very question can create stress, self-doubt, and dissatisfaction, blocking the joy they're trying to find. The key to happiness, it turns out, isn't chasing it head-on. Many of life's most fulfilling moments come when we're focused on something else entirely, whether it's building relationships, creating something meaningful, or simply getting lost in an activity. Happiness sneaks up on us when we're not looking for it. Philosophers and psychologists have long studied this strange contradiction. Instead of obsessing over feeling good all the time, they suggest engaging in things that naturally lead to joy, curiosity, kindness, passion. These pursuits bring happiness as a side effect rather than the main goal. It's an ironic truth. Those who let go of happiness as a target often find it effortlessly, while those who fixate on it may never quite reach it. Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox. You're sitting across the room from a friend, each holding a deck of cards. You agree to shuffle them and randomly draw a card at the same time. Somehow, every time you reveal your card, your friend's card is always the exact match. No delay, no communication, just instant, eerie synchronicity. Sounds impossible, right? This is the essence of the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox, or EPR paradox. In 1935, Albert Einstein and his colleagues argued that quantum mechanics predicted something that seemed absurd. Two particles, even separated by vast distances, could be mysteriously linked. Measuring one particle would instantly determine the state of the other, no matter how far apart they were. This spooky action at a distance defied common sense, and even Einstein himself doubted it. He believed something was missing, that hidden variables must explain this strange connection. But years later, experiments confirmed the weirdness. Entangled particles really do influence each other faster than light can travel. This doesn't mean information is sent between them, but rather that reality at the quantum level doesn't follow our usual logic. The paradox challenged the very foundations of physics. If two objects can be inexplicably connected across space, what does that say about the nature of reality? Is the universe fundamentally unpredictable, or are we just missing a deeper truth? Even today, the full implications remain mysterious. What started as a thought experiment meant to poke holes in quantum mechanics ended up proving just how bizarre our universe really is. Hardy's paradox. A detective examines two security cameras pointed at the same door. One shows a person walking in, while the other shows no one entering at all. Both cameras are working perfectly, yet they contradict each other. How can that be? This mirrors the strange reality of Hardy's paradox, a quantum mechanics puzzle that challenges our understanding of measurement and logic. Imagine an electron and its antimatter twin, a positron, heading toward each other. Normally, when matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate. But in some quantum setups, there's a bizarre twist. They can both seemingly pass through certain paths without colliding, even though logic says that should be impossible. According to classical physics, if one particle takes a specific path, the other must take a different one. But Hardy's paradox suggests that in rare cases, both particles appear to take paths they shouldn't be able to occupy at the same time, creating a contradiction. It's as if reality is undecided until the very moment we observe it. Experiments confirm that quantum mechanics allows for these seemingly impossible outcomes. The paradox highlights a deeper question about measurement itself. Does observing a system force it into a definite state, changing what was possible before? At the quantum level, our intuition breaks down. Particles behave in ways that seem absurd, yet the math and experiments back it up. Hardy's paradox is a reminder that the universe doesn't always play by the rules we expect. Paradox of the Vitali set. Suppose you have a long ribbon and want to cut it into pieces. Normally, if you follow a specific rule, like cutting it into equal lengths, you end up with a well-defined set of pieces. But what if you could cut it in a way that defies logic, creating pieces that seem to exist everywhere and nowhere at the same time? This is the strange reality of the paradox of the Vitali set, a mathematical construction that challenges our understanding of measurement. It starts with the idea of picking numbers randomly from the number line. Normally, we assume every number can be measured in some way, whether it's whole, rational, or irrational. But the Vitali set shows that it's possible to construct a collection of numbers so bizarre that they can't be measured at all. Here's the catch. To create this set, you rely on a special mathematical assumption called the axiom of choice, which lets you make infinitely many selections without explicitly defining how. The result? A set of numbers that cannot be assigned a meaningful size. You can't say how long it is, how big it is, or even compare it to ordinary numbers in any intuitive way. While this might sound abstract, it reveals a deep flaw in our usual way of defining size and measurement. The paradox of the Vitali set forces mathematicians to confront the limits of what can be measured, showing that, in some cases, even infinity itself refuses to follow the rules. Paradox of the non-measurable set. Can everything be measured? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. We measure time, distance, weight. Everything has a size, right? But in mathematics, some sets exist that defy this basic assumption. No matter what method you use, assigning them a clear length, area, or volume leads to contradictions. These are called non-measurable sets, and their existence creates a paradox that challenges our understanding of space itself. Picture a straight line. You can measure any segment of it, no matter how small. Now imagine a set of points scattered along the line in such a way that their total length is neither zero nor any specific number. If you try to measure it, the rules of mathematics break down. It's not that we lack the right tool, it's that measurement itself becomes meaningless for these sets. This paradox reveals strange truths about infinity. It's related to cases where a solid object can be split and rearranged into something twice its original size, not by stretching or adding anything, but simply by moving pieces around in just the right way. While this sounds impossible in the physical world, it highlights the limits of how we define size and structure in mathematics. It turns out, measurement, a concept we rely on every day, is not as universal as we thought. Some things exist in ways that make measuring them an unsolvable puzzle. Paradox of the continuum. Can infinity come in different sizes? It sounds absurd, but that's exactly what mathematics suggests. The paradox of the continuum challenges our understanding of numbers, space, and infinity itself. Picture there is a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, all occupied. Surprisingly, it can still accommodate new guests by shifting each current guest to the next room, freeing up the first. This strange logic works for what's called a countable infinity, like the set of whole numbers, which go on forever, but can still be listed in order. Now, think about all the real numbers between 0 and 1. Unlike whole numbers, they form a continuous, unbroken line. No matter how many you list, an infinite number still remain uncounted. This is a larger type of infinity, so vast that it makes the previous one look small. The paradox arises when we try to bridge the gap between these two infinities. Mathematician Georg Cantor proved that the infinity of real numbers is strictly larger than the infinity of whole numbers. But is there a size of infinity that sits between them? Surprisingly, no one has been able to prove whether such a middle ground infinity exists. It's one of the greatest open questions in mathematics. Infinity isn't just one endless concept. It comes in different forms, some more mysterious than others. The paradox of the continuum reminds us that even the simplest ideas, like counting, can lead to some of the deepest mysteries of the universe. Paradox of the omniscient machine. Would you trust a machine that knows everything, even the future? Imagine a super-intelligent computer, programmed to be infallible, capable of predicting every event with perfect accuracy. Sounds impressive, right? But here's where things get strange. Suppose you sit before this machine and ask it to predict whether you'll raise your right hand in the next 10 seconds. The machine, being omniscient, prints out its answer. You will raise your right hand. Now you have a choice. If you follow the prediction, it was correct. But what if, just to prove the machine wrong, you stubbornly refuse to raise your hand? Suddenly, the machine's prediction is false, which shouldn't be possible for an omniscient being. This creates a paradox. If the machine truly knows the future, your choice is already determined, meaning free will doesn't exist. But if you have the power to contradict the prediction, the machine isn't omniscient after all. Some argue that such a machine could never exist, because any system trying to predict a conscious mind would always run into this contradiction. Others propose that the machine could account for your rebellion, predicting your attempt to defy it before you even think of it. But then, does that mean you're merely playing out a script with no true agency? The paradox forces us to question whether perfect knowledge of the future is even possible, or if the very act of knowing it would change it, an endless loop of fate and free will colliding. Boltzmann brain. What if I told you there are true facts about the universe that can never be proven, not because we're not smart enough, but because proof itself has limits? This mind-bending idea comes from Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which shook the very foundation of mathematics. To see why, imagine a futuristic AI designed to answer every possible question. It starts strong, proving simple facts like 2 + 2 = 4. But as it digs deeper, it finds a strange statement. This statement cannot be proven. Now the AI is stuck. If the statement is true, then it's telling the truth. It really can't be proven. But if it could be proven, that would make it false. No matter what, the AI has hit an unavoidable gap in its reasoning. Gödel showed that in any sufficiently complex mathematical system, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven within that system. And it gets worse. You can never prove that the system itself is completely free of contradictions. This shattered the dream of creating a perfect, complete rule book for mathematics. It's like discovering that no matter how much you learn, there will always be truths forever beyond your reach. The implications go beyond math, affecting logic, philosophy, even artificial intelligence. Gödel's theorems remind us that certainty has limits, and sometimes, the deeper you search for truth, the more you realize how much remains unknowable. Schrödinger's cat paradox, a cat, a box, and a deadly quantum experiment, sounds like the setup for a strange joke, but it's actually one of the most famous thought experiments in physics. Picture this. A cat is placed inside a sealed box. Inside the box, there's a vial of poison, set to break if a radioactive atom decays. The problem? Quantum mechanics tells us that the atom exists in a weird state of superposition, both decayed and not decayed, until someone observes it. But if the poison's release depends on the atom and the cat's fate depends on the poison, then until we open the box, the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. This paradox was devised by physicist Erwin Schrödinger to highlight how bizarre quantum mechanics can be. In the microscopic world, particles can exist in multiple states at once, but when we observe them, they choose a single reality. Does this mean reality itself is undecided until we look? Some interpretations suggest that observing the cat collapses reality into one state, either alive or dead. Others propose that both outcomes happen, branching into parallel universes, where in one, the cat survives, and in the other, it doesn't. The paradox challenges our understanding of existence itself. Does reality only become real when we look? Or is it just that we don't yet grasp the true nature of quantum mechanics? Either way, Schrödinger's cat isn't just a pet in a box. It's a mind-bending glimpse into the strangeness of our universe. Black hole information paradox. Picture throwing your diary into a fire. The pages turn to ash, but in theory, if you had the right tools, you could still piece together what was written. Information isn't destroyed, it just changes form. But now, imagine tossing that diary into a black hole. Common sense says the information should still exist somewhere. But according to Einstein's theory of relativity, once something falls in, it's gone forever. No escape, no trace, just a one-way trip past the event horizon. Here's the paradox. Quantum mechanics, our best theory of tiny particles, insists that information can never be lost. Even if something is smashed, burned, or scrambled, the fundamental data about it should always remain in the universe. But black holes seem to erase information entirely, breaking this fundamental rule. Physicist Stephen Hawking made things even weirder. He discovered that black holes slowly evaporate over time due to Hawking radiation. But when a black hole vanishes, so does everything inside. If that information is truly lost, it means our understanding of physics is incomplete. So where does the lost information go? Some theories suggest it's encoded in the event horizon, while others propose it leaks out in a hidden form. Some even speculate that black holes could be portals to alternate realities. The black hole information paradox challenges our understanding of reality itself. If we crack the mystery, we might just unlock the next great revolution in physics. Gödel's incompleteness theorem. What if I told you there are true facts about the universe that can never be proven? Not because we're not smart enough, but because proof itself has limits. This mind-bending idea comes from Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which shook the very foundation of mathematics. To see why, imagine a futuristic AI designed to answer every possible question. It starts strong, proving simple facts like 2 + 2 = 4. But as it digs deeper, it finds a strange statement. This statement cannot be proven. Now the AI is stuck. If the statement is true, then it's telling the truth. It really can't be proven. But if it could be proven, that would make it false. No matter what, the AI has hit an unavoidable gap in its reasoning. Gödel showed that in any sufficiently complex mathematical system, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven within that system. And it gets worse. You can never prove that the system itself is completely free of contradictions. This shattered the dream of creating a perfect, complete rulebook for mathematics. It's like discovering that no matter how much you learn, there will always be truths forever beyond your reach. The implications go beyond math, affecting logic, philosophy, even artificial intelligence. Gödel's theorems remind us that certainty has limits. And sometimes, the deeper you search for truth, the more you realize how much remains unknowable.